The morning mist clung to the mountainside like a shroud, and through it, Staff Sergeant Maya Chen could see the distant enemy encampment that had been bleeding American forces dry for 3 weeks. Her breath formed small clouds in the frigid air as she adjusted her scope, the familiar weight of her rifle resting against her shoulder like an old friend. 600 meters downrange, targets moved with the casual confidence of people who believed they were untouchable. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. They were wrong. Maya had been lying in this position for 14 hours, motionless as the rocks around her, watching and waiting for the moment that would justify every doubt, every sneer, every instructor who had told her she was too soft for the killing trade. Her ghillie suit blended perfectly with the autumn landscape, making her invisible to the naked eye. But the real camouflage was the stillness she'd learned to carry inside herself. The ability to become nothing more than another shadow on the mountainside. 3 months earlier, Maya had stood in the crisp morning air outside the Mountain Warfare Training Center in Colorado, watching other candidates file through the entrance with the confident swagger of soldiers who'd never been told they didn't belong. The facility stretched across a valley surrounded by peaks that touched the sky, a place where the military's elite came to learn the art of precision killing in the world's most unforgiving terrain. Maya adjusted the strap of her duffel bag and approached the checkpoint, her orders clutched in one hand and 3 years of determination compressed into the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. She'd trained for this moment through 2 combat deployments, hundreds of hours on the range, and countless nights studying ballistics tables by flashlight in forward operating bases across Syria and Iraq. The guard at the entrance barely looked up from his clipboard when she presented her paperwork. "Chen, Maya, reporting for Advanced Sniper School," she said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone who'd earned her sergeant's stripes in places where mistakes got people killed. "You sure you're in the right place?" The guard's tone carried the casual dismissiveness that Maya had learned to recognize over 6 years in the infantry. "Sniper school's pretty intense. Maybe you meant to report to the communications course down the road." Maya kept her expression neutral, the way she'd learned to handle doubt that wore uniforms and carried clipboards. "I'm sure. Staff Sergeant Chen, orders dated 3 weeks ago, approved by Colonel Morrison personally." The guard finally looked up, his eyes taking in Maya's compact frame, and the kind of precise military bearing that came from years of proving herself in a profession that hadn't wanted her in the first place. At 5'4" and weighing barely 130 pounds, she didn't look like the kind of person who could put a bullet through a target's eye from half a mile away. Appearances could be deceiving. "Wait here," the guard said, disappearing into the office behind him. Maya could hear the murmur of conversation, the shuffle of paperwork, and the particular kind of bureaucratic confusion that happened when someone encountered something that didn't fit their expectations. 5 minutes later, a sergeant major emerged from the building, his uniform bearing the kind of decorations that spoke of serious time in serious places. He was older, maybe 50, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades teaching young soldiers how to kill efficiently and come home alive. "Sergeant Chen?" His voice carried professional curiosity rather than dismissal. "I'm Sergeant Major Williams. I understand you're here for sniper school." "Yes, Sergeant Major. I have my orders right here." Williams accepted the paperwork and studied it with the careful attention of someone who'd learned that details mattered in his line of work. Maya's record was impressive, even by military standards. Expert marksman, combat veteran, 2 Bronze Stars, and a recommendation letter from her battalion commander that used words like exceptional and, quote, outstanding under fire. "Your scores are solid," Williams said, handing back her orders. "But sniper school isn't just about shooting. It's about mental toughness, emotional control, the ability to take a human life from long distance and live with that choice. Some people just aren't built for this kind of work." Maya met his gaze directly, her brown eyes steady and unwavering. "With respect, Sergeant Major, I've been taking lives and living with those choices for 3 years. The only difference between what I've been doing and what you teach here is the distance involved." Williams almost smiled. "Almost. We'll see about that. Report to Building C at 0600 tomorrow. Try not to let the other candidates intimidate you." The suggestion that she might be intimidated by her fellow students was almost amusing. Maya had been the only woman in her infantry unit, the only woman in her combat engineer's school, and the only woman in half a dozen training courses that had been designed around the assumption that serious soldiers were male. She'd learned to navigate environments where her presence was questioned, her abilities doubted, and her right to be there challenged on a daily basis. She'd also learned to let her performance speak louder than her critics. Building C housed the candidate quarters, a long barracks that smelled like industrial disinfectant and the particular mixture of anxiety and determination that always surrounded military training facilities. Maya found her assigned bunk and began unpacking with the methodical efficiency that had become second nature during her years of service. The other candidates filtered in throughout the afternoon, and Maya studied them with the careful attention she brought to any tactical situation. 15 men, all of them bigger than her, most of them carrying themselves with the confident swagger that came from never having had their presence questioned or their abilities doubted. "Look what we got here," one of them said as Maya arranged her gear in the regulation footlocker at the end of her bunk. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of build that suggested hours in the gym and a metabolism that had never met a challenge it couldn't handle. "Didn't know they were letting admin clerks into sniper school now." Maya continued organizing her equipment without looking up. "They're not," she said simply. "Infantry, 2 combat tours, currently attached to the 75th Ranger Regiment." The tall soldier exchanged glances with his buddies, clearly not expecting that particular response. Rangers had a reputation that transcended branch rivalries and service stereotypes. You didn't get attached to the Rangers without proving yourself in ways that most soldiers never had to. "Rangers, huh?" Another candidate said, this one shorter but built like a linebacker. "What's your MOS?" 11B, Maya replied, using the military designation for infantry soldier. With additional training in explosives, urban warfare, and designated marksman protocols. That got their attention. Infantry soldiers were the tip of the spear, the people who did the close-quarters fighting that made headlines and earned medals. The fact that Maya had not only survived in that environment but thrived enough to earn a ranger attachment suggested that maybe appearances really could be deceiving. "So what brings you to sniper school?" the tall soldier asked, his tone shifting from dismissive to curious. Most infantry types prefer the up-close and personal approach. Maya finally looked up from her footlocker, meeting his gaze with the kind of direct eye contact that she'd learned carried more weight than words. Because sometimes the most important shot is the one nobody sees coming from a mile away. That evening, the candidates gathered in the briefing room for their initial orientation. The instructor who addressed them was Master Sergeant Jake Torres, a man whose reputation in the sniping community bordered on legendary. He'd served in every major conflict of the past 2 decades, had more confirmed kills than most soldiers had total shots fired, and had trained half the special operations snipers currently operating in combat zones around the world. Torres stood at the front of the room with the casual authority of someone who'd earned the right to be exactly where he was, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of hard-earned knowledge and carefully maintained standards. "Over the next 12 weeks," he began, "half of you will quit. Of the half that remains, maybe 3 or 4 will actually graduate. Sniper school isn't just about learning to shoot accurately from long distance. Any decent marksman can do that with enough practice." He paused, his eyes scanning the assembled candidates with the calculating assessment of someone who'd learned to identify potential in its raw form. "What we teach here is the art of invisible warfare. How to move through enemy territory without being detected. How to remain motionless for hours or days until the perfect shot presents itself. How to kill a specific target from extreme distance and disappear without a trace. Most importantly, how to make decisions that will haunt you for the rest of your life and live with the consequences." Maya listened with the focused attention she brought to all instruction, her notebook ready, her mind automatically cataloging the skills and knowledge she'd need to master. She'd always been a student first, understanding that in the military, the people who learned fastest live longest. "The enemy we're training you to fight isn't stupid," Torres continued. "They know American snipers are out there, and they've developed countermeasures. They use decoys, they vary their patterns, they've learned to make themselves hard targets. Your job is to be harder, smarter, and more patient than they are." One of the candidates raised his hand. "Master Sergeant, what's the longest confirmed kill shot in this program?" Torres smiled, the expression of someone who'd been asked that question many times before. "The longest shot doesn't matter. What matters is the right shot at the right time. I've seen snipers miss easy targets at 300 meters because they were thinking about glory instead of mission accomplishment. I've also seen snipers change the outcome of entire battles with a single well-placed round from over a mile away. Quote, he let that sink in for a moment before continuing. The people who succeed in this program understand that sniping isn't about personal achievement. It's about being a force multiplier for your unit, eliminating high-value targets that conventional forces can't reach, and sometimes making the one shot that saves hundreds of American lives. Maya felt a familiar tightening in her chest, the sense of purpose that had driven her through every challenge of her military career. This wasn't just about proving herself anymore. This was about becoming the kind of soldier who could make a difference in ways that regular infantry couldn't. Your first week will be physical conditioning and basic fieldcraft, Torres announced. We need to know you can carry your equipment over long distances in difficult terrain and remain effective when you reach your target area. Week 2 through 4 will be marksmanship fundamentals, learning to engage targets at distances that will test everything you think you know about shooting. Maya automatically began planning her approach to each phase of training, her mind working through the challenges she'd face and the preparation she'd need to succeed. Physical conditioning had never been a problem. Years of infantry service had left her in the kind of shape that most people only dreamed about. Marksmanship was her strength, the skill that had earned her this opportunity in the first place. Weeks 5 through 8 will be advanced fieldcraft and camouflage, Torres continued. You'll learn to become invisible in any environment, to move through enemy territory without detection, and to establish and maintain observation posts for extended periods. This is where most candidates fail. Not because they can't shoot, but because they can't handle the mental pressure of remaining perfectly still and alert for hours at a time. The mental aspects of sniping were what interested Maya most. She'd always been good at remaining calm under pressure, at maintaining focus when everything around her was chaos. In her infantry unit, she'd been the soldier that others looked to when situations got complicated, the one who could think clearly when bullets were flying and decisions had to be made quickly. The final 4 weeks will be practical exercises, Torres concluded. Live-fire missions in realistic scenarios, working with forward observers and command elements, learning to integrate sniper operations with conventional forces. If you make it that far, you'll face the final examination, a solo mission, where you'll have to locate, observe, and engage a target under realistic combat conditions. Maya felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with accepting a new challenge. 12 weeks to transform herself from a competent infantry soldier into a precision killer capable of changing the outcome of battles with a single shot. 12 weeks to prove that the instructors who told her she was too emotional for this kind of work had been wrong. 12 weeks to become something that most people couldn't imagine and some people couldn't accept. The first week of training began at 0500 hours with a physical fitness test that would have challenged Olympic athletes. Maya found herself running through mountain terrain carrying a 60-pound pack, her rifle, and enough ammunition to outfit a small squad. The pace was brutal, designed to push candidates beyond their perceived limitations and identify the ones who would quit when the pressure became unbearable. Maya had learned long ago that quitting was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not when she was representing every woman who'd ever been told she wasn't tough enough. Every soldier who'd been underestimated because of their size or gender. Every person who'd ever had to prove their worth in a profession that questioned their right to be there. She finished the run in the top quarter of the class, her breathing controlled and her stride steady despite the burning in her legs and the weight of her equipment. Behind her, 2 candidates had already dropped out, unable to maintain the pace required for the initial phase of training. Not bad, Chen, Torres said as she crossed the finish line. But endurance running is the easy part. Let's see how you handle precision shooting when you're exhausted, dehydrated, and running on 3 hours of sleep. The marksmanship portion of the test took place on a range that stretched across a valley floor, with targets positioned at distances that challenged even experienced marksmen. Maya approached her assigned firing position with the methodical preparation that had become her trademark, checking her equipment, calculating wind speed and direction, and adjusting her scope with the precise movements of someone who understood that accuracy was a function of preparation as much as talent. Her first shot rang out across the valley, the sound echoing off the surrounding mountains. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Through her scope, Maya watched the bullet impact exactly where she'd aimed, a perfect center mass hit on a target 600 meters away. "Decent," Torres said, studying her target through binoculars. "Now do it again." Maya's second shot was equally accurate, as was her third, fourth, and fifth. By the time she'd completed the prescribed course of fire, she'd achieved a perfect score, something that had never been accomplished by a candidate on their first day of training. "How long have you been shooting?" Torres asked, as Maya cleared her rifle and prepared to move to the next station. "My father started teaching me when I was 8, Maya replied. "He was a Marine sniper in Vietnam, understood that hitting what you aimed at was the difference between coming home and becoming a statistic." Torres nodded slowly, beginning to understand that Maya Chen wasn't like the other candidates. Her presence here wasn't about proving a point or breaking barriers. It was about honoring a tradition that had been passed down through generations of warriors who understood that some fights could only be won from a distance. "Your father's still alive?" Torres asked. "Killed in action, Afghanistan, 2018, Maya said simply. Roadside bomb while he was training Afghan National Army marksmen. The information explained a lot about Maya's motivation and her approach to military service. She wasn't just representing herself or making a statement about women in combat roles. She was carrying forward a legacy that had been earned through sacrifice and dedication to the principle that American soldiers deserved the best training and support possible. "I'm sorry for your loss," Torres said, the words carrying genuine respect rather than empty sympathy. "Thank you, Master Sergeant. He would have wanted me to be here." Over the following days, Maya's performance continued to exceed expectations. She excelled in physical conditioning, demonstrated exceptional marksmanship skills, and showed the kind of mental toughness that couldn't be taught or faked. While other candidates struggled with the demands of the program, Maya seemed to thrive on the challenge. But it was during the psychological evaluation that the first serious questions about her suitability for sniper training were raised. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the program's staff psychologist, conducted individual interviews with each candidate to assess their mental stability and emotional preparedness for the realities of precision killing. The session took place in a small office that felt more like a therapy session than a military evaluation, and Maya approached it with the same professional focus she brought to every aspect of her training. "Tell me about your first combat experience," Dr. Mitchell began, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who'd heard every possible variation of war stories and trauma responses. Maya described her deployment to Syria, where her infantry unit had been tasked with clearing urban areas controlled by insurgent forces. She spoke matter-of-factly about firefights that had lasted for hours, about watching friends get wounded or killed, about making split-second decisions that determined who lived and who died. "How did those experiences affect you emotionally?" Dr. Mitchell asked. "They taught me that hesitation gets people killed," Maya replied. "They taught me that the people depending on you deserve your best effort, regardless of how you feel about the situation. They taught me that emotions are a luxury you can't afford when lives are on the line." Dr. Mitchell made notes on her tablet, her expression revealing nothing about her assessment of Maya's responses. "Have you ever had to kill someone in close combat?" "Yes." "How did that make you feel?" Maya considered the question carefully, understanding that her answer would influence her future in ways that extended far beyond sniper school. "It made me feel like I'd done my job, like I'd protected the soldiers I was responsible for, like I'd honored the training and trust that had been invested in me." Any feelings of guilt or remorse? Guilt about taking a life? No. Remorse about the circumstances that made it necessary? Yes. Dr. Mitchell looked up from her tablet, studying Maya with the intense focus of someone trying to understand a response that didn't fit expected patterns. "Can you elaborate on that distinction?" Maya chose her words carefully, knowing that the wrong answer could end her career before it really began. "I don't feel guilty about killing someone who was trying to kill American soldiers. That's what war is, and pretending otherwise doesn't help anyone. But I do regret that we live in a world where young people have to kill other young people because their governments can't find better ways to resolve their differences. It was an honest answer, perhaps more honest than was wise in the context of a psychological evaluation for a program that required candidates to be emotionally detached from the consequences of their actions. But Maya had learned that authenticity was usually the best policy when dealing with people whose job it was to see through deception. Some of your instructors have expressed concern about your emotional responses to training scenarios, Dr. Mitchell said. They've noted that you seem to form personal connections with your fellow candidates, that you show concern for their welfare, that you've been observed comforting a candidate who is struggling with homesickness. Maya felt a familiar frustration rising in her chest, the same feeling she'd experienced whenever her competence was questioned because she refused to abandon basic human decency. Is caring about the welfare of fellow soldiers considered a disqualifying trait? In sniper operations, emotional attachment can compromise mission effectiveness, Dr. Mitchell explained. The ability to remain detached, to prioritize mission accomplishment over personal relationships, is considered essential for success in this field. With respect, Doctor, I've never let personal relationships compromise mission effectiveness. Caring about people doesn't mean making poor tactical decisions. It means fighting harder to ensure that everyone comes home. Dr. Mitchell continued taking notes, her expression suggesting that Maya's responses were both unexpected and problematic. How would you handle a situation where completing your mission might result in casualties among your own forces? I'd complete the mission, Maya said without hesitation. But I'd also do everything possible to minimize casualties among friendlies. Those aren't mutually exclusive objectives. And if they were? Maya met Dr. Mitchell's gaze directly, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd faced similar decisions in real combat situations. Then I'd make the choice that saved the most American lives, and I'd live with the consequences. But I'd never stop looking for alternatives that might save everyone. The interview continued for another hour, covering topics that ranged from family relationships to career goals to hypothetical scenarios that tested Maya's willingness to make difficult decisions under pressure. Throughout the session, Maya maintained the professional composure that had served her well throughout her military career, but she could sense that her responses weren't aligning with whatever profile Dr. Mitchell was looking for. 3 days later, Maya was called to Master Sergeant Torres's office for what she suspected would be a conversation about her future in the program. Torres sat behind his desk with a manila folder that contained what Maya assumed was Dr. Mitchell's psychological evaluation, and his expression suggested that the conversation wasn't going to go well. "Sit down, Chen," Torres said without preamble. "We need to talk about your suitability for sniper training." Maya took the offered chair and waited for the verdict that would determine whether her career as a precision marksman would end before it really began. She'd been through similar conversations before, moments when her future hinged on the perceptions and prejudices of people who held the power to open or close doors. "Your marksmanship scores are the highest we've seen in this program," Torres began. "Your physical conditioning is excellent, your tactical knowledge is solid, and your performance in field exercises has been outstanding." Maya waited for the inevitable but that would signal the end of her sniper school ambitions. "But," Torres continued, "there are concerns about your psychological profile and emotional stability." "What kind of concerns?" Torres opened the folder and consulted Dr. Mitchell's report, his expression suggesting that he was reading something he didn't entirely agree with. "The evaluation indicates that you demonstrate excessive emotional attachment to fellow candidates, that you prioritize interpersonal relationships over mission objectives, and that you lack the emotional detachment necessary for precision killing operations." Maya felt the familiar surge of anger that came with being misunderstood and mischaracterized by people who'd never faced the situations they were so confident in judging. "Master Sergeant, I've been in combat for 3 years. I've made life-and-death decisions under fire. I've completed missions that required precise application of lethal force, and I've never let emotions compromise operational effectiveness." "I've read your service record," Torres said. "Your performance in combat has been exemplary. But sniper operations are different from conventional infantry work. The psychological pressures are unique, and not everyone is suited for this kind of warfare." Maya leaned forward in her chair, her voice carrying the conviction of someone who'd spent years proving herself in environments that hadn't wanted to accept her. "What exactly do you think disqualifies me? The fact that I care about the welfare of my fellow soldiers? The fact that I don't treat killing as a casual activity? The fact that I understand that every trigger pull has consequences that extend beyond the immediate tactical situation?" Torres studied her for a long moment, his expression suggesting that he was wrestling with competing considerations. "Chen, this isn't personal. It's about program standards and operational requirements. It feels personal when my qualifications are questioned, because I don't fit someone's stereotype of what a sniper should be, Maya replied. I've outperformed most of the other candidates in every measurable category, but I'm being eliminated because I don't match the psychological profile of a sociopath. That's not what the evaluation says. Then what does it say? Torres consulted the report again, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation he was being required to have. It says that your emotional responses suggest you might hesitate at a critical moment, that your concern for others might compromise your ability to take necessary action, that your empathy could be a liability in situations that require absolute commitment to mission accomplishment. Maya stood up, her controlled anger finally breaking through the professional composure she'd maintained throughout her military career. Master Sergeant, I've killed people who were trying to kill American soldiers. I've made decisions that resulted in enemy casualties and friendly force preservation. I've never hesitated when action was required, and I've never let empathy prevent me from doing my job. But you've also never had to kill someone from a mile away while watching them through a scope for hours before taking the shot, Torres pointed out. That's a different kind of psychological pressure. How do you know I can't handle it if you won't give me the chance to prove it? Torres closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, his expression suggesting that he was about to deliver a verdict that he didn't entirely support. The recommendation is that you be returned to your unit, with a notation that you're unsuitable for precision marksman training due to psychological concerns. Maya felt the familiar weight of rejection settling on her shoulders, the same feeling she'd experienced when other doors had been closed, because she didn't fit someone's preconceptions about what soldiers should look like or how they should think. Is this your recommendation or Dr. Mitchell's? It's the program's official recommendation. That's not what I asked. Torres was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the difference between what he was required to say and what he actually believed. My recommendation would be to let you complete the training and prove yourself in practical exercises, but my recommendation doesn't carry the same weight as a psychological evaluation. Maya understood. Torres was being forced to eliminate a promising candidate because she didn't fit the psychological profile that had been established for sniper operations, regardless of her actual performance or demonstrated capabilities. It was the same kind of institutional bias that had followed her throughout her career, dressed up in professional language and clinical assessments. When do I leave? Maya asked. Tomorrow morning. Transportation back to your unit has been arranged. Maya nodded once and turned to leave, but Torres's voice stopped her at the door. Chen, for what it's worth, I think they're making a mistake. You've got the skills and the temperament for this work. Don't let one evaluation define your capabilities. Maya looked back at him, her expression carrying the weight of years spent proving herself to people who'd rather not be proven wrong. Thank you, Master Sergeant. That means more than you know. As Maya left the office and walked across the base toward her quarters, she felt the familiar mixture of disappointment and determination that had sustained her through every setback of her military career. Sniper school was over before it had really begun, but her service would continue in other forms and other places. She had no way of knowing that 18 months later she would be lying motionless on a mountainside in Afghanistan, about to take the shot that would prove every psychological evaluation wrong, and change the course of a war that had been grinding on for 2 decades. Sometimes the most important victories came to those who were willing to wait for their moment, regardless of what anyone else believed about their capabilities. 18 months after her dismissal from sniper school, Maya Chen found herself crouched in the ruins of a bombed-out building in eastern Afghanistan, watching American soldiers die through the scope of a rifle she wasn't supposed to have. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same psychological evaluation that had deemed her too emotional for precision killing was now the only thing standing between complete mission failure and the kind of tactical victory that could shift the momentum of an entire theater of operations. The morning had started with what military planners euphemistically called a routine patrol, the kind of mission that looked simple on paper but had a tendency to become complicated when it encountered the realities of asymmetric warfare in terrain that favored defenders who'd been fighting foreign invaders for longer than most American soldiers had been alive. Maya's unit, Bravo Company of the 2nd Battalion, 87th Infantry Regiment, had been tasked with clearing a valley that intelligence reports suggested was being used as a staging area for attacks against the main supply route connecting Kabul to forward operating bases in the eastern provinces. The mission was supposed to take 6 hours. Move in, sweep the area, destroy any enemy equipment or installations, and return to base in time for evening chow. It had been 12 hours since they'd lost contact with headquarters, 8 hours since their last successful radio transmission, and 4 hours since Maya had realized that her company was trapped in a valley that had been turned into a carefully orchestrated killing field by an enemy force that had been planning this engagement for weeks. Captain Derek Morrison, the company commander, lay behind cover 30 meters from Maya's position, his left leg torn apart by shrapnel from an improvised explosive device that had detonated as the lead squad moved through what appeared to be an abandoned village. 3 other soldiers had been wounded in the initial blast, and the follow-up ambush had pinned down the entire company in positions that offered concealment but no realistic hope of escape. The enemy had chosen their ground well. The valley was narrow, with steep sides that channeled movement into predetermined kill zones. The village itself was a maze of compound walls and destroyed buildings that provided excellent cover for defenders, while creating fatal bottlenecks for attacking forces. Most importantly, the high ground on both sides of the valley was occupied by enemy marksmen who could engage American forces from positions that were nearly impossible to assault with conventional infantry tactics. Maya had identified at least 6 separate firing positions during the hours they'd been pinned down, each one manned by shooters who demonstrated the kind of patience and marksmanship skills that suggested professional military training rather than the hasty preparations of local militia forces. These weren't farmers with hunting rifles. These were experienced fighters who understood how to use terrain and superior positioning to neutralize a larger, better-equipped force. The situation had deteriorated throughout the day as American casualties mounted and ammunition supplies dwindled. 2 soldiers had been killed in the initial ambush, 3 more wounded seriously enough to require immediate medical evacuation that couldn't be provided, while the company remained under effective enemy fire. Captain Morrison's tactical options had been reduced to calling for air support that couldn't be provided due to cloud cover and waiting for a relief force that couldn't reach them while the valley remained under enemy control. Maya had spent the morning trying to establish communication with higher headquarters using equipment that had been damaged in the initial explosion. Her secondary military occupational specialty was communications, a skill that had proven valuable during her infantry deployments when maintaining contact with command elements meant the difference between coordinated tactical success and isolated disasters. But even when she'd managed to jury-rig a radio capable of reaching their base, the response had been predictably bureaucratic. Relief forces were being organized, air support was being requested, casualty evacuation helicopters were being prepped for departure as soon as the tactical situation permitted. All of which was military speak for, "Sit tight and try not to die while we figure out how to help you." Maya understood the limitations. The valley where they were trapped was beyond the range of conventional artillery support. Too small for effective close air support given the proximity of friendly and enemy forces, and too heavily defended for helicopter operations until the high ground positions could be neutralized. In military terms, Bravo Company was what strategists called a, quote, tactical problem that required creative solutions rather than standard operational procedures. The creative solution that Maya had been contemplating for the past 3 hours involved equipment that she technically wasn't qualified to use, tactics that weren't part of her official military occupational specialty, and a level of risk that would probably result in court-martial proceedings if she survived to face them. Hidden in her personal gear, wrapped in a sleeping bag and carried as personal effects rather than official equipment, was a rifle that had belonged to her father. Master Sergeant William Chen had carried the weapon through 3 combat deployments, had used it to eliminate high-value targets at ranges that challenged the limits of ballistic science, and had bequeathed it to his daughter, with the understanding that some tools were too valuable to be surrendered to military bureaucracy when their owner died in service to his country. The rifle was a custom-built precision instrument based on a military platform, but modified with components that reflected 20 years of combat experience and an understanding of marksmanship that transcended official training programs. The scope was a German-manufactured optic that cost more than most soldiers made in a month. The barrel had been hand-lapped by a gunsmith who specialized in rifles for special operations forces. The trigger had been adjusted to break at exactly 2 pounds of pressure, precise enough for shots that measured success in fractions of inches at distances where most people couldn't see targets with the naked eye. Maya had carried the rifle through 2 combat deployments, keeping it clean and zeroed, but never having occasion to use it for its intended purpose. Her official weapon was the standard infantry rifle assigned to her military occupational specialty, adequate for the close-range engagements that characterized most modern combat but lacking the precision required for the kind of long-range work that her father had specialized in. Now, trapped in a valley with her unit facing annihilation by an enemy force that controlled the high ground, Maya was contemplating a course of action that would either save American lives or confirm every assessment about her psychological unsuitability for precision marksmanship. The primary enemy position was located on a rocky outcropping approximately 800 meters from her current location, positioned to provide overlapping fire across the entire valley floor, while remaining virtually immune to return fire from conventional infantry weapons. Maya had been observing the position through binoculars for the past hour, noting the movement patterns of the enemy marksman, and identifying what appeared to be a command element that was coordinating the defensive fire. Through her optics, she'd identified a figure who appeared to be directing the other shooters, someone whose elimination might disrupt the coordinated defense long enough for her company to break contact and move to more defensible positions. The target was partially concealed behind natural cover, presenting a difficult shot even under ideal conditions, given the range, wind conditions, and the improvised nature of her firing position. The shot would challenge everything she'd learned about precision marksmanship. Maya had been calculating ballistics in her head for the past 30 minutes, estimating wind speed and direction, factoring in the effects of altitude and temperature on bullet trajectory, and accounting for the movement of her target within the narrow window of opportunity when he exposed himself enough to present a viable shot. The mathematics of long-range shooting were complex enough when conducted from prepared positions with optimal equipment and unlimited time for preparation. Attempting such a shot from an improvised position, with equipment that hadn't been properly zeroed for current conditions, while under enemy fire and without the benefit of a spotter to provide corrections, was the kind of tactical gamble that could either save her unit or waste their last opportunity to influence the outcome of the engagement. First Sergeant Michael Rodriguez crawled through the rubble to Maya's position, his movement careful and deliberate to avoid drawing attention from the enemy marksman who'd been engaging anything that moved throughout the day. Rodriguez was a career infantry soldier with 15 years of experience in places where experience was measured in survived engagements rather than time in service. "Chen, we need to try something different," Rodriguez said, settling into cover beside Maya's position. "Captain's been hit pretty bad, and we're running low on ammunition. If we don't break contact soon, we're going to have a lot more casualties." Maya continued studying the enemy position through her binoculars, her mind working through the tactical problem with the methodical approach that had served her well throughout her military career. "First Sergeant, what do you know about long-range precision shooting?" Rodriguez looked at her with the expression of someone who'd just been asked a question that didn't make sense in the context of their current situation. "I know that it's a specialized skill that requires specialized training and specialized equipment, none of which we currently have access to." Maya lowered her binoculars and met Rodriguez's gaze directly. "What if we did have access to that equipment?" "Chen, our designated marksmen are good, but the range to those positions is beyond anything they've trained for with standard rifles. We're talking about shots that require sniper-level precision." Maya was quiet for a moment, weighing the consequences of revealing information that she'd kept secret throughout her military career. The rifle hidden in her gear represented more than just a piece of equipment. It was a connection to her father's legacy and a tool that she'd never expected to use in combat. But American soldiers were dying and her unit faced annihilation unless someone was willing to take risks that transcended normal operational parameters. "First Sergeant, I need to tell you something that's not in my official military record." Rodriguez studied her with the calculating look of someone who'd learned to recognize when situations were about to become more complicated than they already were. "What kind of something?" "I have access to precision shooting equipment and training that isn't reflected in my military occupational specialty." "What the hell does that mean?" Maya chose her words carefully, understanding that what she revealed in the next few minutes would determine whether she faced court-martial or commendation when this mission was over. "My father was a Marine sniper. He trained me in precision marksmanship from childhood, and I've maintained those skills throughout my military career. I also have access to a rifle that's capable of engaging targets at the ranges we're dealing with." Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, processing information that changed his understanding of Maya's capabilities and the tactical options available to their unit. Chen, are you telling me that you've been carrying sniper equipment without authorization? I'm telling you that I have the capability to engage the enemy positions that are currently preventing our unit from completing its mission. Have you ever made shots at this range? Maya thought about the countless hours she'd spent on firing ranges with her father, learning to engage targets at distances that challenged the limits of equipment and human skill. She thought about the precision shooting competitions she'd won before joining the military, and the informal training sessions she'd conducted with other soldiers who'd recognized her unusual level of marksmanship ability. Yes, First Sergeant. I've made shots at this range and longer. Rodriguez looked toward the enemy positions, then back at Maya, clearly wrestling with the decision to authorize an action that fell outside normal operational procedures. What do you need? I need 30 minutes to prepare the shot and establish a proper firing position. I need someone to observe and provide security while I'm focused on the target. And I need you to be prepared to move the unit as soon as I take the shot, because our position will be compromised immediately. What are the chances of success? Maya considered the question carefully, weighing the factors that would influence the outcome of what would arguably be the most important shot of her life. Given the range, conditions, and equipment, I'd estimate a 70% probability of successfully engaging the primary target. And if you miss? If I miss, we're in the same situation we're in now, except the enemy will know our exact position and will probably concentrate fire on this location. Rodriguez was quiet for another moment, calculating risks and benefits with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd made similar decisions under pressure throughout his career. What about after you take the shot? What's your assessment of our tactical situation? If I can eliminate the primary target, there's a good chance the coordinated defense will break down enough for us to move to better positions. If the other marksmen maintain discipline and continue engaging, we'll have gained maybe 15 minutes of reduced fire while they reorganize. 15 minutes might be enough. Maya understood what Rodriguez wasn't saying directly. 15 minutes of reduced enemy fire might be enough time to evacuate the wounded, redistribute ammunition, and establish communications with higher headquarters. It might be enough time to call in accurate artillery fire or close air support. Most importantly, it might be enough time to prevent the complete loss of an American infantry company in a valley that would become another casualty statistic in a war that most people back home had stopped paying attention to. First Sergeant, I need to be clear about something, Maya said. What I'm proposing to do isn't authorized by my military occupational specialty, my current orders, or official tactical doctrine. If this goes wrong, there will be consequences that extend beyond the immediate tactical situation. Rodriguez met her gaze with the direct honesty of a career soldier who'd learned to distinguish between what was officially authorized and what was tactically necessary. Chen, if we don't try something different, a lot of good soldiers are going to die in this valley. Whatever consequences you face afterward, at least you'll be alive to face them. Maya nodded once and began moving toward her equipment, understanding that she was about to cross a line that would define the rest of her military career. The rifle that her father had carried through 3 wars was about to be used for the purpose it had been designed for, in the hands of a soldier who'd been deemed too emotional for precision killing, but who was now the only person in the valley with the capability to change the outcome of an engagement that threatened to annihilate an entire American unit. Retrieving the rifle from her personal gear required careful movement to avoid detection by enemy observers who'd been tracking any signs of activity throughout the day. Maya crawled through the ruins of the building where her squad had taken cover, moving slowly and deliberately to avoid creating dust clouds or movement signatures that might draw fire. The weapon case was exactly where she'd left it, concealed among sleeping bags and personal equipment in a way that would pass casual inspection, but wouldn't survive detailed scrutiny by someone who understood what they were looking for. Maya opened the case with the careful attention of someone handling a precision instrument, checking each component for damage that might have occurred during the movement and combat of the past 12 hours. The rifle was exactly as her father had left it, cleaned and maintained with the obsessive attention to detail that characterized professional snipers throughout the military. Every component had been selected for its contribution to accuracy and reliability under combat conditions. The scope was mounted with rings that had been precision machined to ensure perfect alignment. The barrel was free-floated to prevent contact with the stock that might affect bullet trajectory. Even the ammunition was hand-loaded to specifications that maximized consistency and accuracy. Maya assembled the weapon with movements that had been practiced thousands of times under her father's instruction, her hands working through the familiar routine while her mind focused on the tactical problem she was about to attempt to solve. The rifle felt exactly right in her hands, balanced and purposeful in a way that her issued infantry weapon never had. Setting up a proper shooting position in the ruins of a building that had been partially destroyed by explosives required improvisation and adaptability. Maya needed a stable platform for the rifle, concealment from enemy observation, and protection from return fire, while maintaining a clear field of fire toward the target area. She also needed an escape route that would allow her to move to a different position immediately after taking the shot. Using rubble and debris, Maya constructed a firing position that met her requirements while remaining virtually invisible from the enemy positions. The bipod legs of her rifle rested on chunks of concrete that had been arranged to provide the exact height and angle needed for the shot. Her body was positioned behind additional rubble that would stop small arms fire while allowing her to observe and engage the target. First Sergeant Rodriguez positioned himself where he could observe the target area through binoculars, while maintaining radio contact with the rest of the unit. His job was to confirm target identification, provide information about wind conditions and target movement, and coordinate the unit's movement once Maya took the shot. Target is a male, approximately 40 years old, wearing what appears to be military-style clothing, Rodriguez reported through their improvised communication system. He's been directing fire from other positions and appears to be the primary coordinator for their defensive plan. Maya settled behind her rifle and began the mental process that her father had taught her for long-range precision shooting. First, she established a natural point of aim, positioning her body so that the rifle pointed toward the target area without requiring muscular tension to maintain alignment. Then she began calculating the ballistic solution for the shot, estimating the effects of wind, distance, altitude, and temperature on bullet trajectory. The range to target was approximately 820 meters, confirmed by a laser rangefinder that Maya had purchased with her own money and carried as personal equipment. Wind speed was estimated at 8 to 10 miles per hour from left to right, based on observation of vegetation movement and dust patterns in the valley. Temperature was approximately 75 degrees Fahrenheit, with clear atmospheric conditions that would have minimal effect on bullet flight. Maya adjusted her scope to compensate for the range and wind conditions, making calculations that had become second nature through years of practice and study. The mathematics of ballistics were complex, but she learned to internalize the relationships between variables in a way that allowed for quick, accurate adjustments under pressure. Through her scope, the target area became magnified and detailed in a way that made the distance seem manageable. Maya could see individual rocks and vegetation features, could observe the movement patterns of enemy personnel, and could identify the specific location where her target appeared periodically to direct the activities of other shooters. Target appears approximately every 90 seconds to 2 minutes, Rodriguez reported. Exposure time is usually 10 to 15 seconds, partial concealment behind natural cover. Maya absorbed this information and began timing the target's appearances, looking for patterns that would allow her to predict when he would be visible and how long she would have to take the shot. Precision shooting was as much about patience and timing as it was about marksmanship skill. The first appearance gave Maya a chance to study the target through her scope and refine her understanding of the shooting problem. The man was partially concealed behind a large rock, exposing only his head and shoulders when he moved to observe different parts of the valley or communicate with other positions. The available target area was small, requiring shot placement that left no margin for error. The second appearance allowed Maya to confirm her ballistic calculations and ensure that her scope adjustments were correct for the range and conditions. She dry-fired the rifle several times, practicing her trigger control and breathing techniques while maintaining sight alignment on the target area. The third appearance was the moment of truth. Maya settled into her shooting position, controlled her breathing, and waited for the target to expose himself in the location where she'd been aiming. When he appeared, she began the trigger press that her father had taught her, applying steady pressure while maintaining perfect sight alignment until the rifle fired. The shot broke cleanly, the recoil driving the rifle straight back into Maya's shoulder while she maintained sight picture to observe the impact. Through her scope, she watched the bullet strike exactly where she'd aimed, eliminating the primary coordinator of the enemy defensive plan, with the kind of precision that justified every hour of training she'd received. and every doubt that had been expressed about her suitability for this kind of work. The effect on the enemy position was immediate and dramatic. The coordinated fire that had pinned down Maya's unit for 12 hours suddenly became sporadic and disorganized as the remaining enemy fighters lost their central command and control. Without their leader directing their efforts, the defensive plan that had been so effective began to fall apart. "Target down," Rodriguez confirmed through binoculars. "Enemy fire is decreasing significantly." Maya was already moving to a different position, understanding that her muzzle flash and sound signature had revealed her location to any enemy personnel who'd been observing her area. The shot had been successful, but now she needed to avoid the consequences of her temporary exposure. Captain Morrison's voice crackled through the radio system, stronger than it had been since he'd been wounded in the initial ambush. "All units, this is 6. Prepare to move to Rally Point Alpha on my command. Suppressive fire on known enemy positions." Maya broke down her rifle and packed it away with the same careful attention to detail that had characterized her setup procedures. The weapon had performed exactly as her father had promised it would, delivering precision and reliability when American lives depended on both. As Bravo Company began its movement to more defensible positions, Maya found herself carrying equipment that had just saved the lives of every soldier in her unit. The psychological evaluation that had deemed her too emotional for sniper school seemed like a distant memory, irrelevant in the face of what she'd just accomplished under the most demanding conditions imaginable. The shot had been perfect, but Maya understood that perfection under pressure was what her father had spent years teaching her to achieve. The real test would be what happened next, when her actions came under the scrutiny of military bureaucracy and the same institutional biases that had prevented her from receiving official training in the skills that had just saved American lives. For now, though, her unit was moving to safety, her fellow soldiers were alive, and Maya Chen had proven that competence mattered more than credentials when lives hung in the balance. Sometimes the most important battles were won by people who'd been told they weren't qualified to fight them. The debriefing room at Forward Operating Base Wolverine felt more like a courtroom than a place for tactical analysis, and Maya Chen sat at attention while a panel of officers dissected every decision she'd made during what military reports would eventually classify as the, quote, Toragar Valley incident. 3 weeks had passed since her unauthorized use of precision marksmanship had saved Bravo Company from annihilation, and those 3 weeks had been filled with interviews, investigations, and the kind of bureaucratic scrutiny that turned heroic actions into potential court-martial offenses. Colonel Patricia Hayes sat at the center of the panel, her silver eagles catching the fluorescent light as she reviewed the incident report for what seemed like the 100th time. Hayes was a career officer who'd earned her rank through 2 decades of competent service in logistics and administration, the kind of leader who understood regulations better than tactics and valued procedural compliance above operational results. "Staff Sergeant Chen," Colonel Hayes began, her voice carrying the formal authority of someone conducting an official inquiry, "you stand accused of violating Article 86 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice by possessing unauthorized equipment, Article 92 by disobeying direct orders regarding weapons possession, and Article 134 for conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline." Maya maintained her position of attention, her eyes focused on a point on the wall behind the panel. She'd been through enough military legal proceedings to understand that her responses during this debriefing would determine whether she faced criminal charges or received official recognition for actions that had saved American lives. "Do you understand these charges?" Hayes continued. "Yes, ma'am." "How do you plead to the specification that on or about October 15th, you possessed and employed a non-issued weapon system without proper authorization?" Maya had spent the past 3 weeks preparing for this moment, consulting with a military attorney who'd explained that her options ranged from accepting non-judicial punishment to demanding a full court-martial trial. The decision she made in the next few seconds would determine the trajectory of her military career and potentially her civilian life after service. "Ma'am, I plead not guilty to all charges." Colonel Hayes looked up from her paperwork, clearly not expecting that particular response. "Staff Sergeant, the evidence regarding your possession and use of unauthorized equipment is not in dispute. Multiple witnesses have confirmed that you employed a non-issued rifle to engage enemy targets during the Toragar Valley engagement." Quote, "Yes, ma'am, I did employ a personal weapon to engage enemy targets, but I dispute that this action violated any lawful order or regulation." Major Samuel Torres, who served as the investigating officer for the case, consulted his notes with the expression of someone who'd heard unexpected testimony that complicated his neat summation of events. "Staff Sergeant Chen, Can you explain how possessing an unauthorized weapon doesn't constitute a violation of military regulations? Maya had rehearsed this response with her attorney, understanding that her defense rested on technicalities that challenged the military's assumptions about equipment authorization and individual initiative under combat conditions. Sir, the weapon in question was carried as personal effects in accordance with regulations governing soldiers' right to maintain personal property that doesn't interfere with military duties. The weapon was not carried in lieu of issued equipment, was not used for unauthorized purposes, and was employed only when operational necessity required capabilities that exceeded those of standard equipment. Colonel Hayes leaned forward, clearly intrigued by an argument that she hadn't encountered in previous disciplinary proceedings. Are you claiming that soldiers have the right to carry personal weapons into combat zones? Ma'am, I'm claiming that soldiers have the right to carry personal property that contributes to mission accomplishment, particularly when that property provides capabilities that aren't available through official channels. Major Torres shuffled through his files, looking for precedents that might address Maya's argument. Staff Sergeant, are you aware of any regulation that specifically authorizes the carrying of personal weapons in combat zones? Sir, I'm not aware of any regulation that specifically prohibits the carrying of personal weapons when those weapons are used to accomplish assigned missions and save American lives. The distinction was important, and Maya could see that the panel was beginning to understand the complexity of the legal issues surrounding her case. Military regulations were comprehensive, but they couldn't address every possible situation that soldiers might encounter in combat. The gap between what was explicitly authorized and what was tactically necessary created gray areas that required judgment rather than blind adherence to bureaucratic procedures. Captain Jennifer Walsh, the third member of the panel, spoke for the first time since the hearing had begun. Walsh was a combat veteran who'd served as a company commander in Iraq, and her questions carried the weight of someone who understood the difference between peacetime regulations and wartime realities. Staff Sergeant Chen, can you describe the tactical situation that led to your decision to employ personal equipment? Maya relaxed slightly, sensing that she was finally being asked questions by someone who understood the context of her actions. Ma'am, Bravo Company was pinned down by enemy fire from elevated positions that couldn't be engaged effectively with standard infantry weapons. Captain Morrison had been wounded, we'd suffered multiple casualties, and conventional relief forces couldn't reach our position due to enemy control of the high ground. What were your alternatives? Ma'am, our alternatives were to continue taking casualties while waiting for air support that couldn't be provided due to weather conditions, or to attempt a direct assault on fortified positions that would have resulted in catastrophic losses. Captain Walsh consulted her own notes, which included tactical assessments from other officers who'd reviewed the engagement. According to the after-action report, your shot eliminated the primary coordinator of the enemy defensive plan and enabled your unit to break contact successfully. Yes, ma'am. What was the range of this engagement? Approximately 820 meters, ma'am. Captain Walsh looked toward Colonel Hayes, her expression suggesting that she was beginning to see Maya's actions in a different light. Ma'am, I'd like to note for the record that 800 meters exceeds the effective range of standard infantry weapons by a significant margin. The capability that Staff Sergeant Chen provided wasn't available through any other means. Colonel Hayes appeared uncomfortable with the direction the hearing was taking, clearly preferring the straightforward disciplinary action that had seemed appropriate when the case was first presented. Captain Walsh, are you suggesting that we overlook violations of military regulations because the outcome was favorable? Ma'am, I'm suggesting that we consider whether regulations were actually violated when a soldier used available resources to accomplish an assigned mission and save American lives. Major Torres rejoined the conversation, consulting additional documents that had been provided by higher headquarters. There's another complication that the panel should consider. Staff Sergeant Chen's actions have attracted attention from senior leadership, including personnel, who are questioning why a soldier with her demonstrated capabilities was previously denied access to official precision marksmanship training. Maya felt a familiar tightness in her chest, understanding that her case had become more than a simple disciplinary matter. The success of her unauthorized shot had raised questions about the military's selection criteria for specialized training and the institutional biases that prevented qualified personnel from receiving opportunities to develop their skills. What kind of attention? Colonel Hayes asked. Major Torres produced a classified message that bore the insignia of United States Special Operations Command. the organization responsible for the military's most elite units in sensitive operations. General Patricia Morrison, Commanding General of Special Operations Command, has requested a full review of this case and all related training records. The mention of General Morrison sent a ripple of concern through the panel. Morrison was a legendary figure in the special operations community, an officer who'd earned her stars through combat leadership rather than staff work, and her interest in Maya's case suggested that the implications extended far beyond a simple disciplinary hearing. "What does Special Operations Command want with an infantry soldier?" Hayes asked. According to this message, they're interested in understanding how a soldier who was deemed unsuitable for sniper training was able to accomplish precision marksmanship tasks that exceeded the capabilities of officially trained personnel. Maya understood that her case had become a test case for military policies that affected thousands of soldiers who'd been denied opportunities based on subjective assessments rather than objective performance standards. The shot she'd taken in Toragar Valley had demonstrated capabilities that challenged institutional assumptions about who was qualified for specialized training. Captain Walsh leaned back in her chair, clearly reassessing the entire case. "Major Torres, are you telling us that General Morrison is questioning the validity of our current selection criteria for precision marksmanship training?" "I'm telling you that she's ordered a comprehensive review of training protocols, selection criteria, and the psychological evaluation processes that determine who receives access to advanced military education." The implications were staggering. Maya's unauthorized shot hadn't just saved her unit. It had exposed systemic problems in how the military identified and developed talent among its personnel. The same psychological evaluation that had deemed her too emotional for sniper school was now being scrutinized by senior leaders who understood that emotional stability and tactical competence weren't mutually exclusive. Colonel Hayes closed the file in front of her, clearly recognizing that the hearing had moved beyond her authority to resolve. "This panel will recess while we consult with higher headquarters regarding the appropriate disposition of this case." Maya remained at attention while the panel filed out, leaving her alone with the knowledge that her career hung in the balance of decisions being made by people she'd never met, in offices she'd never seen, based on considerations that extended far beyond her individual case. 2 hours later, the panel reconvened with an additional member whose presence changed the entire dynamic of the proceeding. Command Sergeant Major Elizabeth Santos wore the distinctive uniform of Army Special Forces. Her chest-bearing decorations that spoke of combat service in places where conventional forces couldn't operate effectively. Santos was an imposing figure whose reputation in the special operations community was built on 3 decades of service in the military's most demanding assignments. She'd served as the senior enlisted advisor to multiple special operations units, had personally selected and trained hundreds of elite soldiers, and carried the kind of authority that transcended rank and protocol. "Staff Sergeant Chen," Santos said as she took her seat, "I've been asked to provide input on this case from the perspective of someone who understands the operational requirements for precision marksmanship in combat environments." Maya sensed that the hearing was about to take a direction that no one had anticipated when the charges were first filed. Santos wasn't there to rubber stamp a disciplinary action. She was there to evaluate Maya's capabilities from the perspective of someone who understood what elite soldiers were capable of accomplishing. "I've reviewed your service record, your performance evaluations, and the tactical details of the Toragar Valley engagement," Santos continued. "I've also reviewed the psychological evaluation that led to your dismissal from sniper school, and I have some questions about the criteria that were used to assess your suitability." Colonel Hayes appeared increasingly uncomfortable as the hearing shifted from a disciplinary proceeding to what looked like an evaluation of institutional policies. "Command Sergeant Major, this hearing is intended to address specific violations of military regulations, not to review training policies." Santos fixed Hayes with the kind of direct stare that senior enlisted soldiers used when addressing officers who'd lost sight of operational realities. "Ma'am, those violations and training policies are directly related. Staff Sergeant Chen was denied access to official training that would have provided her with the same capability she demonstrated through unofficial means. The question we should be asking isn't why she possessed unauthorized equipment, but why she was denied authorized training." The distinction was crucial, and Maya could see that Santos was reframing the entire case in terms that challenged the military's assumptions about talent identification and development. Rather than focusing on rule violations, Santos was questioning the rules themselves. "Staff Sergeant Chen," Santos said, turning her attention back to Maya. "Can you describe the training you received outside official military channels?" Maya straightened, understanding that she was being given an opportunity to explain capabilities that had been dismissed or ignored throughout her military career. "Command Sergeant Major, my father was a Marine sniper who served 3 combat tours in Vietnam and Afghanistan. He began training me in precision marksmanship when I was 8 years old, using techniques and equipment that exceeded civilian hunting standards." "What was the extent of this training?" "Ma'am, by the time I enlisted, I was capable of engaging targets accurately at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters under various environmental conditions. I'd competed successfully in precision shooting competitions at the national level and had informal training from other military snipers who recognized my capabilities." Santos made notes on a tablet, clearly interested in details that previous evaluators had dismissed as irrelevant. "Did you attempt to have this training recognized through official military channels?" "Yes, ma'am. I requested evaluation for advanced marksmanship training during my initial infantry training, but was told that my military occupational specialty didn't require those capabilities." "And when you applied for sniper school?" Maya chose her words carefully, understanding that her answer would be scrutinized by people who had the power to change training policies that affected thousands of soldiers. "Command Sergeant Major, I was dismissed from sniper school based on a psychological evaluation that determined I was too emotionally involved with my fellow soldiers to be effective in precision marksmanship roles." Santos looked up from her tablet, her expression suggesting that she'd encountered similar assessments before and found them problematic. "Can you elaborate on the specific concerns that were raised?" "The evaluation concluded that my empathy and concern for the welfare of other soldiers would compromise my ability to take necessary action under pressure." "And how do you respond to that assessment?" Maya felt the weight of 20 years of proving herself in environments that hadn't wanted to accept her, of demonstrating capabilities that had been dismissed because they didn't fit institutional stereotypes about what soldiers should look like or how they should think. "Command Sergeant Major, I believe that caring about the soldiers you're fighting alongside makes you more effective, not less effective. The shot I took in Toragar Valley was successful precisely because I understood that American lives depended on my performance." Santos smiled for the first time since entering the room, the expression of someone who'd finally heard an answer that made sense in the context of real combat experience. "Staff Sergeant Chen, in your opinion, should empathy be considered a disqualifying trait for precision marksmanship training?" "No, ma'am. I believe empathy should be considered an essential trait for any soldier who's entrusted with the lives of their fellow Americans." The hearing continued for another hour, with Santos asking detailed questions about Maya's training background, her tactical decision-making during the Toragar engagement, and her understanding of the ethical considerations that govern the use of lethal force in combat situations. Throughout the questioning, it became clear that Santos was conducting an informal evaluation that would influence decisions far beyond Maya's individual case. When the hearing finally concluded, Maya was dismissed while the panel deliberated on findings that would determine her future in the military. She waited in the hallway outside the briefing room, knowing that the next few minutes would either validate everything she'd worked for or confirm that institutional bias was stronger than demonstrated competence. 45 minutes later, Command Sergeant Major Santos emerged from the room and approached Maya with the measured steps of someone delivering news that would change a soldier's life. "Staff Sergeant Chen," Santos said, "the panel has reached several conclusions regarding your case." Maya came to attention, prepared for whatever verdict had been reached through deliberations that she couldn't influence. "First, all charges against you have been dismissed. Your actions in Toragar Valley were determined to be consistent with your duty to accomplish assigned missions and protect American lives." Maya felt a surge of relief that she kept carefully controlled, understanding that there was more information coming. "Second, your service record will be amended to reflect your demonstrated capabilities in precision marksmanship, and you'll receive official recognition for actions that saved the lives of your fellow soldiers." Santos paused, studying Maya with the calculating look of someone who was about to make an offer that would test her commitment to military service. "Third, you're being offered immediate transfer to the Special Operations community, with guaranteed access to advanced training that will develop your existing capabilities to their full potential." Maya felt the world shift around her, understanding that everything she'd worked for throughout her military career was being offered to her by people who finally recognized what she was capable of accomplishing. "What would this transfer involve?" Maya asked. "Initial assignment to Special Forces qualification course. followed by advanced sniper training with the military's most elite units. Your demonstrated capabilities suggest that you're ready for responsibilities that exceed conventional infantry assignments. Maya thought about the path that had brought her to this moment. The rejection from sniper school, the years of proving herself in environments that questioned her presence, the unauthorized shot that had saved her unit and exposed institutional biases that had limited countless other soldiers. Command Sergeant Major, I accept the transfer. Santos nodded once, the gesture of someone who'd expected that particular response. Outstanding. Report to the Special Operations Recruiting Station at Fort Bragg in 30 days. Your orders are being prepared now. As Santos walked away, Maya understood that she was about to begin a chapter of her military career that would test everything she'd learned about precision marksmanship, tactical leadership, and the kind of service that extended beyond personal advancement to encompass protection of American interests in places where conventional forces couldn't operate. 6 months later, Maya Chen stood on a mountainside in an undisclosed location, wearing the distinctive uniform of Army Special Forces and carrying equipment that represented the pinnacle of precision marksmanship technology. The soldiers she'd been assigned to protect were members of a classified unit, conducting operations that wouldn't appear in any public records, and the targets she'd been tasked to eliminate represented threats to American security that most people would never know existed. Through her scope, Maya observed an enemy compound where intelligence reports indicated that high-value targets were planning operations against American forces throughout the region. Her mission was to eliminate specific individuals whose deaths would disrupt terrorist networks and prevent attacks that could kill hundreds of innocent people. The range to target was over 1,200 meters, requiring calculations that challenged the limits of ballistic science and equipment that had been designed for the military's most demanding applications. Maya had spent months training for this moment, working with instructors who understood that precision marksmanship was both art and science, requiring technical knowledge and intuitive understanding in equal measure. As she settled into her shooting position and began the mental process that would result in engagement of enemy targets, Maya thought about the psychological evaluation that had deemed her too emotional for this kind of work. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same empathy that had been considered a disqualifying trait was now what drove her to perform missions that protected American lives and interests. The shot, when it came, was perfect. A single round that eliminated a terrorist leader whose death would save countless innocent lives and prevent attacks that had been planned against American targets. Maya's target dropped instantly, confirming that years of training and natural ability had combined to produce the kind of tactical result that justified every decision that had brought her to this moment. As she prepared to move to her extraction point, Maya reflected on the journey that had taken her from rejected sniper school candidate to Special Forces operator conducting classified missions in hostile territory. The transformation had required persistence, capability, and the willingness to prove herself in environments where failure meant death for the people she'd been assigned to protect. But more importantly, it had required institutions that were willing to recognize talent regardless of where it came from, or how it challenged existing assumptions about who was qualified for specialized training. Command Sergeant Major Santos and General Morrison had understood that competence mattered more than credentials, that demonstrated ability was more important than bureaucratic compliance. Maya's story became a case study that was used to reform selection criteria for special operations training, ensuring that future candidates would be evaluated based on their capabilities rather than subjective assessments that reflected institutional bias more than operational requirements. The psychological evaluation protocols that had eliminated qualified candidates were revised to focus on performance under pressure rather than adherence to stereotypical profiles. More importantly, Maya's example inspired other soldiers who'd been told they weren't qualified for specialized training to persist in developing their capabilities and seeking opportunities to serve at the highest levels of military professionalism. Her success demonstrated that excellence could emerge from unexpected sources, and that the military's most valuable assets were often people who'd been overlooked or dismissed by conventional selection processes. The shot that had saved Bravo Company in Toragar Valley had been more than a tactical success. It had been proof that courage, competence, and commitment were more important than conformity to institutional expectations. Maya Chen had proven that soldiers who cared deeply about their fellow Americans were often the most effective at protecting them, and that emotional investment in mission success was a strength rather than a weakness. Years later, when asked about the moment that had changed her career and influenced military training policies, Maya would say that the most important lesson wasn't about marksmanship or tactics. It was about the importance of institutions that were willing to recognize excellence regardless of its source and the value of persistence in the face of doubt and rejection. The war continued, as wars do, but it was now being fought by soldiers who'd been selected and trained based on their demonstrated capabilities rather than their adherence to outdated stereotypes. Maya's legacy wasn't just the lives she'd saved or the targets she'd eliminated. It was the knowledge that the military had become more effective by becoming more inclusive of the talent that existed within its ranks. Sometimes the most important victories were won not on battlefields, but in briefing rooms where policies were changed and barriers were removed. Maya Chen had won both kinds of victories, and in doing so had made her father's sacrifice meaningful in ways that extended far beyond the individual recognition she'd received for her service. The emotional investment that had been considered her greatest weakness had proven to be her greatest strength, driving her to levels of performance that saved American lives and changed institutional policies that would affect thousands of future soldiers. In the end, caring too much had been exactly the qualification that mattered most. 5 years after the Torigar Valley incident, Staff Sergeant Maya Chen stood before a classroom of Special Forces candidates at Fort Bragg, her uniform bearing the distinctive tabs and insignia that marked her as one of the military's elite operators. The students before her represented the next generation of American warriors, men and women who would carry forward the traditions of excellence that had been earned through decades of sacrifice and dedication. Maya's role as an instructor in the Special Forces qualification course was both a recognition of her expertise and a responsibility that she took seriously. The soldiers she trained would operate in the world's most dangerous environments, conducting missions that required the highest levels of skill, judgment, and moral courage. Her job was to ensure that they were prepared for challenges that would test every aspect of their character and capability. Precision marksmanship, Maya began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd proven herself under the most demanding conditions, is more than technical skill. It's about understanding that every shot you take represents a decision that will affect real people in real ways. The mathematics of ballistics are important, but the ethics of engagement are what separate professional soldiers from mere killers. The classroom was filled with candidates who'd already proven themselves exceptional in conventional military roles. They'd survived the physical and mental challenges of the selection course, demonstrated leadership under pressure, and shown the kind of commitment that set them apart from ordinary soldiers. But Maya understood that technical competence was only the beginning of what they needed to master. How many of you believe that emotional detachment is essential for precision shooting? Maya asked, observing the hands that rose throughout the classroom. Nearly every candidate raised their hand, reflecting training that had emphasized the importance of remaining psychologically distant from the human consequences of their actions. It was a perspective that Maya had once shared, before her own experience had taught her that engagement with the moral dimensions of warfare actually enhanced rather than compromised operational effectiveness. I want to tell you about a psychological evaluation that determined I was too emotionally involved with my fellow soldiers to be effective as a sniper, Maya said, watching the surprised expressions that crossed the faces of students who'd assumed that their instructor represented the ideal of detached professionalism. Maya described her rejection from sniper school, the evaluation that had deemed her empathy a disqualifying trait, and the years she'd spent proving that caring about the people you fought alongside made you more effective rather than less effective in combat situations. The shot that changed my career and influenced current training policies wasn't successful because I didn't care about the consequences, Maya explained. It was successful because I understood exactly what those consequences were and was determined to ensure the right outcome. She moved to a whiteboard and began sketching the tactical situation that had led to the engagement in Torigar Valley, explaining how her understanding of the human stakes involved had driven her to achieve a level of precision that pure technical skill couldn't have produced. Emotional investment in mission success isn't a weakness, Maya continued. It's what transforms technical capability into tactical effectiveness. When you understand that American lives depend on your performance, you find reserves of focus and determination that you didn't know existed. One of the candidates, a young sergeant with airborne wings and a ranger tab, raised his hand. "Ma'am, how do you balance emotional engagement with the need to make difficult decisions under pressure?" Maya smiled, recognizing the question as one she'd asked herself throughout her military career. "Sergeant, the balance comes from understanding that emotional engagement doesn't mean emotional paralysis. Caring about the outcome of your actions should motivate you to perform at your highest level, not prevent you from taking necessary action." She described scenarios from her own experience where empathy for fellow soldiers had driven her to achieve results that wouldn't have been possible through technical training alone. The connection between caring and performance was something that traditional military training had often overlooked, treating emotion as an obstacle to effectiveness rather than a source of motivation. The military has learned that diversity of perspective and experience makes units more effective, Maya said. This includes diversity of emotional intelligence and approaches to problem-solving. The stereotype of the emotionally detached warrior doesn't reflect the reality of modern military operations. Maya moved to discuss the broader implications of her experience, explaining how institutional biases had prevented qualified personnel from accessing training that could have saved lives and enhanced operational effectiveness. The reforms that had resulted from her case had opened opportunities for thousands of soldiers whose capabilities had been overlooked due to subjective assessments that reflected cultural assumptions rather than operational requirements. Your generation of Special Forces operators will face challenges that require both technical excellence and moral courage, Maya told the candidates. The enemies you'll confront understand that America's strength comes from the values we represent as much as the weapons we carry. Your ability to embody those values while accomplishing difficult missions will determine your effectiveness. The class continued with practical exercises that tested the candidates' ability to make precision shots under various conditions, but Maya ensured that each exercise included ethical considerations that reflected real-world operational requirements. Students were required to explain not just how they would engage targets, but why specific engagements were justified and what measures they would take to minimize civilian casualties. During one exercise, a candidate achieved a perfect score on a long-range engagement, but failed to account for civilians who might be affected by the shot. Maya used the moment to illustrate how technical proficiency without moral awareness could result in tactical success that undermines strategic objectives. Special Forces operators represent American values in places where conventional diplomacy isn't possible, Maya explained. Your actions reflect not just your individual training, but the principles that our nation stands for. Technical excellence is the minimum standard. Moral leadership is what sets you apart from our adversaries. After the formal training session, Maya met privately with candidates who sought additional guidance on integrating emotional intelligence with tactical effectiveness. These conversations often revealed the depth of thought and commitment that characterized the next generation of American warriors. One candidate, a female sergeant who'd faced challenges similar to those Maya had encountered, asked about strategies for maintaining authenticity while meeting institutional expectations. Maya shared her own experience of finding strength in staying true to her values while adapting to military culture. The institution has evolved, Maya told her, but change takes time and requires people who are willing to demonstrate alternative approaches to traditional problems. Your job isn't to abandon who you are. It's to show how who you are contributes to mission success. Maya's influence extended beyond the classroom through research she conducted on the relationship between emotional intelligence and operational effectiveness. Her work had contributed to revisions in selection criteria for special operations training, ensuring that future candidates were evaluated based on their demonstrated capabilities rather than adherence to outdated psychological profiles. The research had practical implications for military units operating in complex environments, where cultural understanding and human connection were as important as technical skill. Maya's data showed that operators who maintained emotional engagement with their missions achieved better results in situations requiring precision, judgment, and moral courage. Evening found Maya in her quarters, reviewing after-action reports from recent operations where her former students had applied the principles she'd taught them. The reports described successful missions where technical excellence had been combined with ethical leadership to achieve outcomes that protected American interests while minimizing civilian casualties. One report detailed an operation where a former student had declined to take a shot that would have eliminated a high-value target because civilians would have been endangered. Instead, the operator had waited for a better opportunity, eventually achieving mission success without collateral damage. The restraint had required moral courage that traditional training might not have emphasized. Maya understood that her legacy wouldn't be measured primarily by the individual shots she'd taken or the personal recognition she'd received. Her impact would be felt through the soldiers she'd trained and the institutional changes that had resulted from challenging assumptions about what made effective warriors. The transformation in military culture that had begun with her case was ongoing. requiring continued effort from leaders who understood that America's military advantage came from its people as much as its technology. Maya's experience had demonstrated that diversity of thought and approach made units more effective, not less effective. As she prepared for another day of training the next generation of Special Forces operators, Maya reflected on the journey that had taken her from rejected sniper candidate to instructor and researcher, whose work influenced military policy. The path had required persistence, competence, and the willingness to challenge institutional assumptions that limited both individual potential and organizational effectiveness. The young soldiers she trained would face threats that required both technical skill and moral clarity. Their success would depend on their ability to integrate the lessons of precision marksmanship with the principles of ethical leadership. Maya's job was to ensure they understood that these weren't competing requirements, but complementary aspects of professional military service. The emotional investment that had once been considered her greatest weakness had become the foundation of her effectiveness as both an operator and an instructor. Her example had shown that caring deeply about mission success and the welfare of fellow Americans enhanced rather than compromised tactical performance. Maya's story continued to inspire soldiers who'd been told they didn't fit traditional military molds, demonstrating that excellence could emerge from unexpected sources, and that institutional change was possible when people were willing to challenge assumptions and prove alternative approaches. The shot that had saved her unit in Torgar Valley had been more than a tactical success. It had been proof that America's military was strongest when it embraced the full spectrum of talent and perspective within its ranks. The war on terror continued, as conflicts do, but it was now being fought by soldiers who'd been selected and trained based on their demonstrated capabilities rather than their conformity to outdated stereotypes. Maya's legacy lived on in every precise shot taken by operators who understood that technical excellence and moral courage were inseparable aspects of professional military service. Her father would have been proud. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.